my name is Olga. Yeah, I am a senior front-end engineer at Homegate. We also like serverless and Vue.js in there. I'm gonna speak right into this thing, right? I also like JavaScript and putting random symbols into my social media handlers, as you can see. So today I want to talk about testing, because this topic has been very important to me lately. I took it to heart, and I think that, this is the important part. And I'm going to stop on that and say why, right? So, but before we do that, let's start with the quiz. We're not going to do it on GitHub because, connectivity. Simple show of hands. If yes, raise your hand. So question number 1 is, are your front-end components unit tested? Of course, good. Is your application UI automatically tested in browser? A little less, okay. Do you enjoy writing tests? Mixed signals, right? Do you feel safe deploying every change straight to production automatically? Ooh, yeah.
Now you're cross-stretching things.
Yeah, I know, woman, you're crazy. So I think that the answer to all these questions is supposed to be yes, honey. And I'm gonna tell you why, right? So we spend all of our time building products, focusing all the time on our end users, right? The usability, research, and everything, right? We keep them in mind all the time. And our UX designers, they keep creating these personas that they hang on the wall, and then they challenge every single feature against those personas. Like, yeah, will Taylor like the new sharing functionality? Will Elton understand it? But I would like to preach this idea that in every set of personas that has ever been created for any web application, there is one persona missing. And this is a very frustrated engineer, right? The thing is that, I think it's true, because we actually work pretty hard, and we spend a lot of time with the software, like 8 freaking hours a day on a good day, right? And I don't have any research to back up my next statement, but I think that the outcome that is created by a happy person that works on the code that is clean and understandable is going to be much better, even for the end user, than something that a very annoyed, tired, jaded person would write in a code base where nothing is clear, right? So I'd like to promote the point of view that is worth caring about the engineering happiness in the same way as we care for the happiness of our users. And what does it take to make a developer happier, right? So let's think about it. We work on a project sometimes for a prolonged period of time, like the guy on the left there. And probably in this case, we know the code base relatively well, and we feel kind of safe modifying things and deploying them, right? But what if we have just started in the team in a new project? Or what if we just do the modifications occasionally from time to time? I think that we could make it, we can still make everybody from every kind of background feel safe working on the software. And I think that the good testing strategy can help with that. It basically can provide you with a safety net to catch regressions. It provides instant documentation for your code, which is something that I personally never thought about until I had it. And support during refactorings, including emotional support as well, right? So I'm actually a really weird person, because I like to see tests fail. To me, it means that actually tests work, right? And that I obviously made a mistake, but this mistake didn't get anywhere near the end user, right? And if we speak about front-end, this is the phrase that I heard many times. Did anybody else, hear it from the lazy engineer? I think the sentiment behind it is like front-end, it doesn't have, much complexity, like why do we bother test it? And another thing that I'm as my personal crusade that I'm going on, I'm trying to teach people that front-end is actually exceedingly complex, right? So after my 15 years in software engineering, I can give PML, I can confidently say that this is true, because what we actually are doing is this. We are instructing some kind of third-party software that we don't even sometimes know about to present dynamic data to people and robots with a combination of different languages and CSS, right? That's a bit too much, and because we have to pull together so many different components, I think the topic of front-end testing is even more relevant than anything else, because how do you make sure that all this shebang that you glued together with some frameworks works? Also that, does it sound familiar to anyone? Cool. So how do we keep doing what we're doing and basically, stop worrying? I have heard suggestions that you could, wear a helmet and maybe resort to manual testing and hire some 20 testing engineers. But I would suggest that we lawyer up with automated tests. And when it comes to front-end automated testing, there is always this kind of a vague understanding of what does which level of testing means, like unit test, integration test, end-to-end. So I'm put together a couple of slides to explain what I think it means. So since we all mostly work with the component-based frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, the unit test usually tests the component in an isolation, right? It tests mostly how HTML and JavaScript interact with each other, and that emitting certain DOM events, which are sometimes even fake, leads to certain DOM changes, which is not exactly the same thing as testing in browser, where you have browser context, where you could check your CSS if it is applied correctly, and where you can actually not simulate user behavior, but actually test the actual user behavior, but really clicking that button, not emitting the click event, right? So the example of a unit test would be something like, making sure that the active class is assigned to the proper element. But if we think about browser tests, this is where we can actually test and simulate the behavior of our users, right? And we can cover our CSS and check the component in a context. So this is the testing strategy that we're using for our front-end application at HomeGate. So to the left, you're going to see the types of tests, right? I specifically didn't write integration or end-to-end because browser tests, it's hard to say if it's end-to-end, especially if you mock things like APIs. But we have unit tests, which we run on the pre-commit hook and in the CI build. We have browser UI tests, right? When you test the functionality, click things together, which also runs in the CI build. And we have two very small sets of smoke tests that we run post-deployment on test and production stage. And if smoke tests fail after deployment to test, we do not deploy to production. So this is basically our last resort, like our last safeguard. But once it's out there, if the smoke tests fail, we only get notified, right? Because there's not much we can do. So in our experience in the past year, we realized that Cypress is pretty awesome for working with browser tests because of several reasons, right? For me, the biggest selling point was the developer-friendly API. Who here ever worked with anything Selenium-based? Remember the waits and timeouts and async things that you have to, try and retry in case the element didn't arrive to the browser yet. So there is no such thing as Cypress. Like, you can forget all of that. That's how cool the API is. And I, to be honest, have been sold instantly, right? Because who wants to write that? They have really cool spying and stubbing functionality for anything, including network requests. So you can easily mock your API responses and whatnot. And another thing that bothered me with other testing frameworks in JavaScript is how do you debug this kind of stuff? Especially if you run something in a headless mode only and your test fails. And you look at it and it looks correct. And you don't know why. Whether it's the element was not visible in a particular screen size, how do you debug? So Cypress is also cool because it gives you a really handy UI, which allows you tons of stuff. It gives you real-time reloads, it gives you time travel, you can debug with Chrome developer tools, the most familiar tool probably among front-end engineers. And you can see the preview. And of course, as any full-blown testing framework for front-end, you could do screenshots and videos. So, yeah, I guess I better show the thing. This is a little application that I wrote, which is very sophisticated. It consists of one component. And it talks to the very slow API that is basically, I actually written on with API Gateway and DynamoDB, but because I'm running it on my private account, I throttle everything, so it's a bit cheaper. But we have a list of cocktails and some fun facts about them, and this application is, attention, responsive, so the layout changes, from one screen to another, right? So this is our playground. Sorry. So how are we going to test it? This is the Cypress spec. Right, you can use any kind of flavor you like. I prefer jasmine flavored for declaring the tests. And to basically open the page in the browser, this is what you need to type. I type / here because the base URL is would be already given when you run the Cypress, but sure, you could even go and type completely, I don't know, Google.com or anything, and you will open it in Cypress. So let's try and test now whether there is a martini among those cocktails, right? So the coolest thing, like another that blew my mind, is that in Cypress, you sometimes don't even have to write like a CSS selector to get to the element. You can just do something like this. And it will validate whether the element with such text exists on the page, and it will wait for it to exist and retry, and it's like this stuff that's going behind this contains is amazing, but you don't need to care, right? So let's save this thing. I'm gonna stop this application and start the Cypress. So I think it in this command line. Yeah. So here we are in serve again. Now it's on the 8080, right? So this is what I'm gonna run. I'm running, giving it a base URL, and I'm actually running Cypress open because I want the headed mode to showcase the UI. It will take a while to start. And that's what we get. So here's our specs. Like if you have more files, you will see more of them in here. And you can run it. And this is how it looks like. So here to the left, we see a list of tests. This is our can I has a martini that has passed because it actually does contain the martini. And the coolest part of it is that to the right, you got the preview. And to the left, you got the time travel thing where you can mouse over any moment in your test and you will see what was there exactly in the browser. Moreover, you're able to click on it and inspect with developer tools here. So if your test fails, you will find it really quickly. So another thing about, I guess the getting to more complicated elements than just the text, those who worked with other testing frameworks or jQuery probably know this kind of syntax. So you're able to get to any element just with the get. You're giving it completely normal CSS selector. If you don't do typos, you might even get it right. And basically after that, you can chain more methods up to it and do anything with this element, right? Like trigger events on it, and the API is huge and vast. So let's just check if this element basically even exists. No, let's do better. Let's check if it's visible. Because this is also something interesting that Cypress can do for you. Right, let's run it. Oops, what did I do wrong? No worries, there are snippets. That works. Where's the mistake?
And the asterisk is in the wrong place.
Yes, in the wrong position. Cool. Right, so image is visible, and that's what Cypress tells us. And what is behind this visible, right? So I mentioned that you are able to test CSS when you're writing browser tests. So I'm gonna go and mess up my component by hiding the image, and not even with display known, that's gonna, is more thing, but with something better, right? So the DOM element is still there, but it's just hidden. What's gonna happen here? The test is gonna fail, and not just fail, it's gonna tell us exactly why it fails. So it understands that the image is not visible because of this particular CSS thing. Now watch that. I'm gonna hide the element that contains the image. What do you think is gonna happen? It knows. It just knows. This is amazing. So behind, there's of course extensive documentation, but behind some of these nice shorthand Cypress kind of expressions and assertions that you could do with this kind of syntax, should be visible, there is a lot of logic, and it usually is exactly what you need, right? This is how it's cool. what do we normally test with Cypress, right? So this is, of course, an easy test, but since we could, verify whether CSS works or not, we can test something like the layout. So this test, for example, it's gonna tell us whether the layout, the responsive layout that switches between the viewports is actually correct. So this is another handy Cypress thing. So you could basically open the page in a certain viewport, right? It has a lot of preset titles, or you can basically specify width and height, right? So you can check your front end from the perspective of the user, different kind of devices, right? And sometimes we write, if the functionality is the same, we write one test and just describe each, and we iterate over all the screen sizes that we actually support just to be sure. So this one is pretty simple. We're fetching two elements, the image of the cocktail and the wrapper that has the text around it. And here, this is how you chain it. We're basically taking coordinates of them and are making sure that on the phone, the left coordinate of your image is the same as the left coordinate of your text, which means they're one under the other, pretty much. And here we check that it's not the case, right? You could, of course, make it a bit more sophisticated and so on, but I guess this is more or less enough. So. Oh, we don't have images. Sorry. I need to put it back. See, the tests fail, and it's amazing. Right? So this is the one column layout on the small, and if you mouse over, you see everything on the small screen, and you also can debug your small screen in case it fails right there, which is just super handy. Cool. So what if we're testing right now with the actual API? What if the response changes all the time, right? But it's like real world API that is unpredictable. You can mock stuff. The way to do this would look something like this. So before you open your page, before you visit it, you can write Cypress server, which is gonna start the kind of a mocking thing. And you can write something like this, like CI route, and give it the method, give it the endpoint, give it the response body that you want to receive as a mock, and the status code. I somewhere had the response body for the cocktails. Let's smash it there. So now you see there is not all of the cocktails, there are just the three ones that I mocked, right? So your API is mocked, and if you open it, you will see that it is stubbed, right? So, yeah, you can do even that. And this is what we actually do with our front end. That's why I like to avoid the word end-to-end testing, because with our Cypress tests, we actually do not test the APIs. We hope that they're tested, or we test them ourselves in another project, but yeah, we basically can mock them. So that's it for the demo, I guess. Let's go back to this thing. Right, so I think the tests are pretty much useless if they're not run all the time, because if you write tests and they just sit there, like, well, good. We found that it's super easy to use Cypress in the CI. You can basically, if you use, like, for example, the GitLab or something, you just get the image with Cypress installed. It's an NPM package, and you just do your Cypress run. Run is basically the headless mode, as opposed to open. This is all you need. There is one caveat in using Cypress. It only supports Chrome, right? This is my biggest pain point with it. Like, there is this issue that has been open for a while. And I know that guys are really working hard on it, but because the Cypress doesn't use anything like web drivers like Selenium does, they have to build this support completely from scratch, right? So it's gonna take time. But I don't know, the API is so awesome that, yeah, we still use it. Cool, so there is some links. I find the second one particularly useful. It's basically, if we open it, there is a list of all the coolest commands of the API in one glance, so you could play around and, yeah, with some examples. And yeah, I guess it doesn't matter if you test with Cypress or not, it's just one of the tools, but yeah, make sure you test with whatever you can, because like you will feel safe, your colleagues that work in your projects will feel safe, and you will have some time free from testing and like catching regressions and bugs to do something awesome. Thank you. Oh, Too early. Yes.
Hello. Can we write our own assertion like custom matchers in Java?
Yes.
In Jasmine, I guess so, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I seriously recommend to look through the docs. Maybe they're pretty nicely written. And if you go to the API, basically, there is the whole assertion section on existing assertions. I would bet that you will find almost everything you need already existing, but if you want something fancy, yeah, sure, you can.
Yes, sometimes I want to combine. Yeah. Sometimes I want to combine existing assertion in something more concise. That's it.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I've done this with Jasmine.
With Cypress, it's going to be a challenge to make it more concise, but yeah.
Okay, cool, great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Then maybe I ask one. So you showed us how to debug on localhost. There's such a cool UI, and actually I have to admit I use it. But what do you do if something fails on CI? Do you also have so much feedback to really test something that fails on CI?
Let's just run this thing in the headless mode. So basically, this is what we see in CI is when we do the run, we see the output of the headless mode. You see it, right? I didn't really check it before. So this is the feedback with all the specs passing. Should I break something? Do you want to see the broken one?
Please do. So now this is the version which runs on CI using the Electron browser, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you got pretty much the same feedback.
Great. And do you get some of this UI stuff where you see where something is clicked, maybe a video?
Sure. I mean, you can record videos and you can watch them later. There's actually also a paid service from Cypress that you could use. That is called like Dashboard, I think. We used it because we want to parallelize test suites in our CI to make it faster, and that's a premium feature. But it also basically saves all the records from your tests running in the CI, including videos and screenshots and whatever you're basically telling Cypress to save. So you could even see the history, basically. So if they were failing at some point, you will.
Thank you.
For us, it's kind of, we don't really dwell on the failing test because once it's failing, it means the pipeline's blocked and you gotta go and fix it because otherwise nobody can deploy it, right? We do not deploy the failing tests. But yeah. Cool.
Thank you very much. That answers my question.